We're going That was what I was going to warn you. We're going to record this session and send out to anyone who registered. We'll also put it up on our YouTube channel for anyone who wants to either review, share, or check it out if they missed it this evening. So thank you all. It's been quite some time since our most recent webinar. So there's a lot of ground to cover. Tonight's webinar is going to be very different than webinars we've done in the past because I want to focus on one aspect of Regavim's work that doesn't always get a lot of coverage. So what we're going to talk about this evening is essentially our end goal, the level at which Regavim towards which Regavim works, not where we begin, but where we hope to end all of our activities. And as I show you some slides, as I always do, I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by that. So with your permission, I'm going to begin sharing the screen already so that you can all follow along. And I hope you're seeing that well. Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with Regavim, in a nutshell, what Regavim does is try to restore Zionism to Israel's public policy, particularly land use policy. We begin from the very basic understanding that the most important resource that a country has is the land itself, and the decisions about who uses that resource and to what ends and how that will affect the nation's future is land use policy, and that is the most basic expression of our national sovereignty. You can be a lot of things without land. You can be a nation, as the nation of Israel has been for thousands of years, but you can't be a sovereign country. So land use policy is the bedrock, pun intended, of what we try to consider when we look towards Israel's present and future. That being said, everything that Regavim does is rather than seeing that what we do is we work on two levels, really. We work on the micro level, and that's why Regavim is called Regavim. That means little mounds of earth, the smallest unit, really, that you can consider a unit. The furrow that is created when you plow a field is a regev, and that is the level at which we consider Israel's land resources. But on the other hand, we take that small, minute, pixelated view and we try to extrapolate to the bigger picture of land use policy. So here's how we do it. Working on this? Yes, it's working. So tonight's webinar is going to focus on Regavim's work at the policy level, Regavim in the Knesset. By changing policy, we change reality on the ground, and we change reality for the future. What we do is, through a series of incremental steps, we impact the highest levels of Israel's land use policy apparatus. So this evening, we're going to focus on a few of the things that are on our agenda right now to give you a taste of how we identify the big picture topics that we think will shape Israel's land use policy moving forward. And we're going to begin with a very brief overview of really the Regavim method, how we create policy reform or how we attempt to create policy reform to impact policy on a grand scale. So we start with number one, data collection and analysis. That is the aspect of Regavim's work with which most Israelis are most familiar, and that is our field work, literally being boots on the ground throughout the land of Israel, documenting and analyzing every single thing that goes on the ground anywhere where Israel has jurisdiction. That includes the entire state of Israel, Judea and Samaria, and in some cases, even beyond. And we'll talk about one of those cases this evening. But anywhere that Israel has jurisdiction, we collect data and we map it out. We connect those dots and see the big picture. Once we analyze the data that we have collected, we try to identify the points of pressure, really, the areas where there are lacunae in the law, where legislation or policy reform is necessary in order to better express our national interest and to protect our national interest, our national resources, and to create a more secure and more thriving Israel for the future. So once we collect and analyze that data, one of the first things that we do, and many of these steps that you see on the flow kind of chart in front of you are concomitant steps, meaning they happen at the same time. So when we collect and analyze data and we identify a problem or an area that needs to be addressed, we initiate legal action at the same time as we initiate public awareness of the phenomenon, of the issue, sometimes through a specific case that is emblematic of a larger problem. But we find ourselves in court. Now, who do we sue? We sue the very people that we are trying to impact on that upper tier of our activity, and that is the government of Israel. We find ourselves in court on a daily basis, suing the government of Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, the Minister of Defense, various government officials, elected officials, and government bodies that have been entrusted with protecting our land resources and our national interest, and in our opinion, are failing to do so. So we work within that legal framework, the existing legal paradigm, and we take action in the framework of existing law in order to bring awareness not only to the public, but to the government itself, and to force the government to respond to essentially a failure, to address the failure or address a problem or address an area that is not being properly tended to in terms of public policy. This can take sometimes a very, very short amount of time, sometimes a very, very long amount of time. And Regavim is now 19 years old, and some of our cases have been in court for that long. That is not a failure. We have a long view of how policy impact is created. Very often, though, we will find immediate responses when we bring a lawsuit against the government. The government comes to court in its very first statement and says, please remove this case from the docket because we will take action, or we are planning to take action, or we are committed to taking action to address this problem. And even though we have not technically won the case, we have won the war. We have perhaps not had to fight a battle in order to win that particular war. So that's a win as well. At the same time as these things are going on, and sometimes instead of them, and sometimes alongside them, we collect a series of cases that we are addressing, and we take it to Parliament, and we make our elected officials aware of the large policy issue that is the impetus for any particular area of legal action that we take. We couple this with media activity because it is extremely important to create public pressure. As you know, if you haven't taken a picture of it, it didn't happen. If it doesn't appear in the news, it's not going to impact our elected officials. If they don't feel either that the public is interested or that there is some serious gain to be made in sometimes sticking your neck out and taking unpopular action, or fighting the long fight that will take longer than their term of office, they won't do it. They'll take the easy way out. That is the nature of politics. So in order for them to feel the urgency to deal with some of these long-term issues, we create media, public pressure using the media. So that is a very large part of our activity as well. But all of these things together are tools in our larger attempt in our big picture activity, in our very particular brand of activism, and that is to generate policy reform. That can either be through legislation or through government policy initiatives and announcements. After those things happen, and we'll see that down the line in a few examples, we don't stop there. A law is passed, that's not enough, because a law on the books is not what's going to change our reality, not in the present and not in the future. So once a law is passed, we take the next step. Is that law actually being implemented? Is the law being enforced? Are there further steps that need to be taken in order to ensure that the intention of that law is actually implemented on the ground? And so we track the implementation and enforcement of policies and of legislation by once again collecting data, analyzing it, comparing it to the situation that was on the ground or that is developing as a result of the legislation. And sometimes we'll have to take either legal action for failure to enforce the law, which we'll have an example of that this evening, or raise public awareness and parliamentary awareness of things that are still lacking in order to give that law full effect. So we're going to dive right in now that we've seen the overall structure of what we do, how we do it. So now we're going to talk about some specific things that are on the docket at the moment. Some of the legislation that is in Knesset now in various stages of legislation, in various stages in the legislative process. I'm going to try to describe them briefly this evening. When I wrote up the title for tonight's webinar, I said 4 pieces of legislation, but spoiler alert, as I sat down and put it all on paper, I found that there weren't 4, there were at least 7, probably more. But we're going to try to break them down, and I will try to run through them quickly, but not too quickly, so you can get an idea of what these pieces of legislation are and how they fit together to change Israel's public policy regarding land use issues. So number 1 is a law that is now on the books in the state of Israel. It passed through the entire legislative process and is now officially a law. And it has a very specific name in Hebrew, but breaking it down and translating it into English, the law permits for the first time really the protection of Israeli agriculture in the state of Israel. Some of you may have heard previous webinars where we talked about the tremendous challenges that face Israeli farmers in Israel. I am not referring to Judea and Samaria at the moment. I'm talking about what we call Little Israel inside the 1967 borders. Israeli agriculture has always been the engine behind the development of Israel's economy and a major element of the Zionist vision. And it has come under tremendous attack in recent years. So one of the things that we tried to figure out was, how do we protect Jewish farming? How do we protect Israel's agricultural sector? How do we enable Israeli farmers to protect their farms, to protect their livestock, to protect their crops, to protect their families even under this onslaught? So one of the first things that we identified was that it is against the law to reside in grazing areas or in farming areas. When an area is zoned for grazing or for agriculture, it is illegal to build structures there, and it is illegal to live there. And that leaves these areas unprotected and has opened the door to the massive criminal onslaught against Israeli agriculture. So we worked with members of Knesset, and only this past week, this law was passed. We started with this many years ago, 2 governments ago, as a matter of fact, but it finally came full circle with the support of both coalition and opposition members of Knesset and the government itself. And it is now legal under particular conditions and under particular license to build residential structures and reside in grazing and agricultural areas where and when that is deemed necessary. So we're hoping that will be a precedent, first of all, a legal boost for the farmers of Israel, and also a precedent that will be applied in Judea and Samaria as well. It's an extremely complicated issue, which comes to the next piece of legislation. They are related in only in their complication. And when we talk about the next piece of legislation, you will understand why the first piece of legislation is so complicated. We have discussed in the past in previous webinars, and I have discussed at length and written at length in the media all over the world and for many years, the fact that the law in Judea and Samaria is not Israeli law. When Israel decided unilaterally in 1967 to refrain from reestablishing its sovereignty over the Green Line in the areas taken, repatriated in the 1967 war, Israel decided not to extend Israeli law until such time as a political resolution for the people who were living there at the time could be achieved. That still hasn't happened, but Israeli law has been held in abeyance. So, what law is in effect over the Green Line? A combination of very bad things. And they begin with Ottoman land law, and they have added on to them Jordanian law, some British mandatory law, and a lot of military regulation. So one of the most egregious examples of why this is bad and why the state of Israel should be doing something systemic to solve these problems is Jordanian law number 40. When Jordan illegally occupied and eventually annexed the territory that it had taken in the war of 1948 and which it occupied for 19 years, one of the first things they did, well, the first thing that they did was to ethnically cleanse the entire territory of all Jews. Any Jewish person who was found in the territory taken by the Jordanians in 1948 was either killed, taken prisoner, or exiled, banished from the territory. And in order to maintain that ethnic cleansing, the Jordanian regime passed a series of laws, the first of them being the prohibition of sale of land to Jews, essentially to non-Muslims, so technically Christians as well. But if you were either a Muslim or a Jordanian citizen, you could purchase land over the Green Line. If you were a Jew, you could not. And amazing as this may sound, when Israel came back to these territories, it did not abolish this Jordanian law, although it is anti-Semitic, although it is racist, although it is retrograde, and clearly goes against our national interest. The state of Israel has allowed this law to stand. In the 1970s, the legal system of Israel worked out a workaround and created this entirely bizarre system in which Jews couldn't, although Jews as individuals cannot purchase law in Judea and Samaria, corporations that are registered as are incorporated in Judea and Samaria may purchase the land and then they can sell it to Jews. And that remains the situation until today. We decided at Regavim that this was just too much. The fact that Israel has not extended sovereignty, has not reasserted its sovereignty and its legal rights in this area, does not mean that we should be living with an anti-Semitic law of this kind, even if the government of Israel has worked out a way to work around it. It is an expression of values that should not be allowed to stand. And years ago, we went to the Supreme Court to strike this law down. And the Supreme Court at the time said, yes, this is indeed a racist law. This is indeed an extremely problematic law. But the remedy that should be given to this problem is legislative and not legal. They sent us to the Knesset. So that is where we went. We went to the Knesset and we have worked with members of Knesset, and the revocation of Jordanian law number 40 is now in the legislative process before its first reading and is being handled directly by the Minister of Justice. It is an extremely sensitive issue politically. simply because the state of Israel has allowed a situation to evolve that any change in the legal system in Judea and Samaria is used as some sort of scare tactic. The scare tactic being that if we touch anything there, it is an expression of sovereignty, and therefore the world should come down on us like a ton of bricks. But the fact that this anti-Semitic law is still on the books is indefensible, and I don't think that any Western country can actually defend forcing us to maintain it. So we are moving ahead with revocation of Jordanian law number 40 through the legislative process, and I hope to have good news to report sooner rather than later. The next one is about the land registry in Judea and Samaria. The land registry in Judea and Samaria is a closed book, literally and figuratively. Today, if I want to purchase land, or if a Jewish contractor wants to purchase land, or a developer wants to purchase land in Judea and Samaria, the process through which he has to go to the regular process of discovery that doesn't exist anywhere else in Israel is he would have to request to see the land registry, the chain of ownership, and all of the legal documentation on that piece of land from the civil administration, which holds that land registry. Now, it is a well-known fact that the civil administration has on its staff people who report directly to the Palestinian Authority. So anytime an Arab owner requests to have a copy of the documentation of his ownership deed to a piece of land, that is reported directly to the Palestinian Authority, and that Arab landowner finds himself either abruptly disconnected from his head from his body, or he has to be spirited out of the country and placed in protective custody somewhere else, because the Palestinian Authority considers sale of land to Jews in Judea and Samaria a capital offense. So it makes the normal business impossible. It makes the normal conduct of land transactions impossible, and creates a political situation that is abnormal because people cannot establish ownership. And this also gives way to tremendous amounts of fraud. You may have heard, if you follow the news over the years, many people have purchased properties in Judea and Samaria. Jewish people have, or companies or organizations have purchased properties in Judea and Samaria, either buildings or pieces of land, and that only to find out that the person who sold it to them doesn't actually own it. And then there's all sorts of intrigue. You have situations, for example, in the old city of Jerusalem or in Hebron, where properties have remained empty for decades because the chain of ownership cannot be established for this simple reason that the land registry is not available. So we have tried to legislate. We have worked with members of Knesset, both from the coalition and opposition, to pass a law that would require the opening of the land registry in Judea and Samaria, as it is open everywhere else in the state of Israel, as it is open everywhere else in Western countries. If you want to buy a property in whatever country you're living in right now, if you're not in Judea and Samaria, it is not a complicated issue to find out who owns it. Only in Judea and Samaria it is. So that's another piece of legislation that I think reflects the bigger issue of what we're trying to get at here, and that is that the fact that the state of Israel has not extended Israeli law to this territory has created more legal problems than it has solved, has created more conflict than it has avoided, has brought the entire situation to a boil when it should not have, because the point of law is to dispel all of this disclarity, to banish the gray areas and make things clear. And when things are clear, you have less conflict. But by leaving things undefined and clouded and amorphous and more or less secret, you have opened the door to inevitable conflict. And that is the bigger picture that we're trying to address with each of these individual pieces of legislation, but in many of the, as well as in many of the other things that we do regarding the legal process in Judea and Samaria. The fourth piece of legislation that I want to talk about is it's a very interesting one. It has nothing to do with Judea and Samaria. It has to do with our work in the Negev. Now, what you may or may not know is that there are over 80,000 Israeli citizens that have no address, and it's not because they're homeless. Over 80,000 Bedouin Israelis, full citizens with full rights and responsibilities, are listed in their identity card, in their Teudat Zehut, not according to their address, which is a requirement for every other citizen in the country, but according to their tribe. Only tribal affiliation appears on their Teudat Zehut. Now, imagine for a moment that a person, a citizen of Israel, breaks the law. Maybe he parks his car illegally. Maybe he runs a red light. Maybe he doesn't stop at a stop sign. What does the government do? It sends him a ticket. It summons him to court. But if you don't have an address, that is impossible. And the people who don't have an address know that they cannot be found and therefore do whatever they want. The massive crime that goes on in these communities, these off-the-grid communities that are populated by people who have no address, is off the charts and is stunting the development of the Negev as a whole, which is 60% of the state of Israel's land resources. In other words, stunting the development of the state of Israel. There is no reason why, in this day and age, when we have GIS coordinates, GPS coordinates for every inch of ground on planet Earth, that a person's address cannot be listed as a location. And that is what this legislation hopes to do, to use GPS coordinates, more or less, satellite anchored coordinates in lieu of an address. If a person says, I am a Bedouin and I don't have a permanent home and I am a nomad, then they should have these coordinates listed. But in order to collect benefits from the state of Israel, as they do, and in order to be employed by the state of Israel, as they are, and in order to send your children to school in the state of Israel, as they do, and in order to receive any other services from the state of Israel, as they do, they need to have a place to which the state of Israel can turn to find them when necessary. So we are working on legislation that would replace tribal affiliation with precise location coordinates as a method of as an address for the Bedouin of the Negev. Again, this situation is not targeting the Bedouin of the Negev. What it is creating a situation where every citizen of the state of Israel has an address. And if the 80,000 people living without an address didn't happen to be Bedouin, the legislation would be no different. So those are the first four pieces of legislation that are now in the process. Some of them are more advanced than others. As I mentioned, number one is has already been passed into law. Number two is before its first reading. Number three is after its first reading. And number four should be completed within the next month. Number five is much bigger. It is a huge, it's a big deal because it is an amendment to one of Israel's basic laws, essentially a group of laws that has constitutional sort of significance. These basic laws form a quasi-constitution in the state of Israel. And one of the basic laws that was passed in Israel, a little too late, unfortunately, is a basic law requiring a national referendum in any case that the state of Israel intends to cede territory to a foreign power. But here's the problem. That basic law as do all other laws of the State of Israel, applies only to land inside sovereign Israel and does not apply to Judea and Samaria. So the legislative process that we are trying to promote at this point would extend the basic law referendum to Judea, Samaria, and Israel's territorial waters. Think back only a few months ago, it's actually a little longer than that, the previous government, in a parting salvo of, you'll pardon my French, idiocy, signed a treaty that ceded territorial waters to a foreign government, much to our detriment. And there was nothing that could be done to address this problem after the deal, which was secret, had been signed. So the referendum, the amendment that we are trying to promote at this point, would prohibit any territorial concessions over any land under Israeli jurisdiction, not only sovereign Israeli land, but under Israeli jurisdiction, from being ceded to a foreign power of any kind without a national referendum or a supermajority of members of Knesset, 80 or more members of Knesset voting in favor of territorial concession. That's a big deal. And it is being pushed through the process. Well, not pushed, it's being promoted through the legislative process by members of the Land of Israel Caucus, of which Regavim is a constituent member. More on that in other conversations down the line. But the Land of Israel Caucus is the largest caucus in the Knesset, has more than 80 members of Knesset in it, and this amendment to the basic law on national referendum was proposed by the members of the caucus and is working its way through the legislative process. The last hearing was on February the 10th. We are expecting another one before the Passover recess. All of the legal consultations regarding this referendum, the exact definitions of territorial waters that are or are not included, all of these things have been, these hurdles have been cleared, and the amendment is coming up for its first reading, hopefully before the Passover break. The sixth piece of legislation we expect to pass into law next week, and that is for the creation of a civilian airport in the Negev. Now, this sounds like a very strange issue for Regavim to get involved in, but it is something that we have been promoting as part of a much larger vision for the Negev for many years. The Negev has remained undeveloped for many reasons, and that is something that we have tried to address since the day Regavim was founded. One of the ways to bring commerce and to bring development and to bring employment to the Negev is to create an airport there. Of course, there are issues because there are many, since the Sinai was ceded to Egypt in the peace agreement, most of Israel's Air Force bases and its most sensitive military installations were moved to the Negev. So it has to be very carefully engineered to create a civilian airport where all of the air traffic of Israel's military is concentrated. This has made a tremendous impact on the ability of Israel to envision a different future for the Negev, to move all of its training bases in general down south, and to bring all of the benefits of those sorts of developments down to the Negev. So we are very excited that this is finally going to become a reality. We're expecting the second and third readings of this law at the end of this week, and it should be on the books. And that would give it a 7-year time frame for this development, for the construction and implementation of the law, and full operational status of a new civilian airport in southern Israel. Number 7 is a very interesting piece of legislation. that we have tremendous hopes for. It is something that has developed over time as we have observed the massive problem of Israel's ineffective battle against organized crime. One of the biggest problems to Israel's economy now, other than the war, is racketeering. Protection payments in the Negev and the Galilee are so far off the charts that the government of Israel itself came to the conclusion that new tools had to be developed. So the legislation that we have helped to to compose essentially is the result of years of Regavim's research on the ground. Who are the racketeers? Who are the smugglers? Who are the arms dealers? Who are the crime families that are running these organizations? Excuse me. And how do we approach them? How do we get a handle on organized crime in Israel? So the legislation essentially would, and it's being proposed by Moshe Saada from the Likud, and has tremendous amount of support in the government, and that would simply give the no, I'm sorry, Moshe Saada is not from the Likud. My mistake. From the Otzma Yehudit party, and this would give the Israel National Police the authority to declare an organization an organized crime family, and essentially create categories that identify organized crime and therefore give it more tools, more immediate tools, and more effective tools under the law to confront this massive scourge. So these are 7 pieces of legislation that are now currently going through the legislative process. All of them are the results of Regavim's fieldwork over the years, our analysis of the data that we find through our fieldwork, and very, very close and careful work after fleshing out the problems and the black holes and the areas that legislation must address through legal process, through suing the government, through identifying places where the law is either non-existent, ineffective, or counterproductive. On the other hand, there are many things that we're involved in the Knesset with legislators that don't involve legislation per se. They are policy initiatives, things that don't require any new legislation, but address big picture issues that have the power to change the reality on the ground big time. So just a few of these, I wanted to bring a little taste from each of our areas of activity. In the Negev, we're talking about land swaps, and that is when a Bedouin, an official, legal Bedouin town requires more space or claims to require more space in order to include illegal clusters inside its municipal lines. Our policy initiative says, yes, include them inside, but don't just keep making these Bedouin townships bigger and bigger. If you are adding land on one side, you have to take away land on the other. So if you're going to be extending the municipal lines of one of these communities to include illegal clusters inside, then you have to take off empty, unused land from that municipality somewhere else. So that's a policy initiative that is gaining traction. It's part of a much larger vision for how to solve the problems of the Negev and develop the Negev that is included in our Stable Care initiative. I urge you to, if you want to get a real big picture view of what's going on in the Negev, the Stable Care program is on our website, or you can read our book, Beduistan, that lays it all out. The minister in charge of Bedouin affairs and development of the Negev is Minister Amichai Shikli, and he works very, very closely with us. The Stable Care program developed by Regavim is a vision for the development of the Negev through 2050. And about 85% of that program, of our big picture vision for the Negev, has been adopted by the ministry and is now forms the core of the government's 5-year program for the Negev. In Jerusalem, this is our newest area of activity. We have identified massive failures of governance in East Jerusalem, massive failures of building and construction codes, environmental standards, all sorts of massive failures in the eastern part of Jerusalem. Israel is essentially losing half of Jerusalem. So we have begun to address some of these things, and we have now reached the stage where prioritizing government in East Jerusalem has come to the government's agenda in a very, very big way. And more or less every single ministry, save very, very few, has become involved in initiatives that prioritize Israeli governance in East Jerusalem. Part of that, a small part of that, is also kicking UNRWA out of Jerusalem and replacing the malign impact of UNRWA and the entire question of non-citizens in Jerusalem with something much more governable. We'll get to that as well. In Judea and Samaria, one of the things that we're working on in terms of policy right now, which does not require legislation, is to create or to replicate the Antiquities Authority. We're working with a member of Knesset, Amichai Boaron from the Likud, to extend to create an Antiquities Authority over the Green Line in Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland where all of our archaeology more or less exists, is essentially now a black hole. The Israel Antiquities Authority has declined to take charge of antiquities over the Green Line. So we're working on how to address that problem. In addition, we have a policy initiative which does not require legislation, but will have a massive impact in Judea and Samaria, and that is prioritized enforcement for illegal infrastructure elements. That means prioritizing dealing with illegal roads, illegal electricity lines, illegal water delivery systems that the Palestinian Authority is putting up with foreign assistance all over Judea and Samaria. Those things not only empower, but enable the Palestinian Authority to create new villages all through Area C and to literally take over the territory. So by prioritizing enforcement against illegal infrastructure elements, the state of Israel can get a much better handle and a preventative handle on the on illegal construction of individual structures. So we've shifted the focus away from individual illegal buildings to the bigger picture of what's enabling all of these quote unquote villages to spring up and change the map quite literally. So that's an important policy shift that we're already seeing results on the ground. And on the national level, again, we're talking about enforcement of the laws recently passed, in no small part due to Regavim's years of activism, that forbid the state of Israel to have anything to do with the United Nations refugee program known as UNRWA, which was proven to be a full-fledged member of Hamas, fully involved in the massacre of October 7th, and has educated Palestinian children for generations to hate and to kill Jews, and has essentially created the entire concept of Palestinian refugeeism. It is unprecedented and unparalleled in world history that this refugee population has grown exponentially over the years, and the entire concept of UNRWA has finally come up for inspection. The state of Israel passed 2 laws several months ago, forbidding UNRWA's operations in Israel and forbidding Israel to have any dealings whatsoever with UNRWA. But here's what I intimated at the beginning of my remarks this evening, and that is that passing laws by themselves is not enough. Our field coordinator was out today, as a matter of fact, documenting UNRWA schools in Jerusalem that are still fully active. One of them, as a matter of fact, has a big sign, not only that it's an UNRWA school, but that it is funded by Saudi Arabia, which you may or may not know is an enemy state to the state of Israel. We don't have relations with Saudi Arabia. So, what on earth is an UNRWA school funded by Saudi Arabia doing operating in our nation's capital? We have monitored all of the UNRWA installations, and we will be suing the government for failing to uphold the law. We will also be suing the government for various other things that are involved in the UNRWA ban. But the interesting thing about all of this is, and this comes back to our place as dealing with land use issues, the structures and the installations from which these UNRWA operations are carried out in Israel, in Jerusalem, and in the outskirts of Jerusalem are Israeli property, Israeli state land. Almost every single one of the refugee camps that was created and is maintained by UNRWA were created on privately owned Jewish land by the Jordanians. But all of them are now considered Israeli state land. So the state of Israel not only has laws that make this illegal, it has every right under the law, under international law, to simply remove UNRWA from its property. So we have to actually take the state of Israel, the Israeli government, to court to force them to actually uphold the law. So that circle that I painted in the very first slide has come now all the way full circle. So we are once again, although the law that we fought for many years was passed, we have now a battle to see that it is actually implemented. So those are the things that I wanted everyone to be aware of, simply those big picture issues that we are dealing with in terms of legislation and policy initiatives. And then, of course, there's always the question of how do we gauge progress? Because sometimes it seems like we're in a never-ending loop. So again, when we get legislation and policy directives passed, we get public awareness around them, and we monitor change on the ground. We monitor enforcement, and we monitor to what degree passing these laws or these policy directives actually creates deterrence so that the phenomenon that we identified on the ground just stop happening. And we have good news to report about all of these things. I encourage you to look at our website. But again, when we see that it is not working, when we see that a law is not being implemented or is not having the effect that we anticipated, we go back to court and start the process again. And finally, I just wanted to give you all a heads up on new Regavim projects. Why is this one empty? I don't know. It should have been our, oops, sorry. Something didn't come through here, but I'll tell you what it was. So the things that we discussed this evening, the legislation and the policy directives, almost all of them have been the result of some of them have been the result of these new projects, new Regavim projects. So first of all, here, Regavim in Jerusalem, as I mentioned, we've been active in Jerusalem only more or less fairly just before the outbreak of the war, and things were suspended quite a lot. Our field coordinators, all of them, were spent each one 200 days or more in active combat duty. So we were quite challenged during the war, but we did continue to monitor the situation in Jerusalem. Our Jerusalem department, as do all of our departments, work very closely with this new department, which is, as you notice, Regavim here in Arabic. We have a new Arab World division that monitors Arab media, official Palestinian Authority media outlets as well, social media, the Arab press, and keeps tabs on what they're actually saying to one another and what they're saying in Arabic. And very often we find indications of things that are then taken up and investigated by our field staff. Sometimes it goes the other way around. Another thing that has had a tremendous impact is our Green Now division, which devotes itself completely to environmental issues, to protect the land of Israel as a whole, and especially focusing on cross-border environmental problems, meaning if the Palestinian Authority is polluting a stream, that pollution doesn't stay inside areas controlled by this Palestinian Authority. It affects the entire land of Israel and vice versa. And there are many, many, many massive problems because of these crisscrossing jurisdictions or gray areas that Green Now is now addressing with tremendous success, I must admit. Um, this has been the fastest takeoff for any of our divisions. We have legislation already and a tremendous impact on the Ministry of Environmental Protection and on the civil administration. So we have a lot to look forward to from Green Now. This is a much more behind the scenes initiative, Zionist Planning Alliance. We have created a community of experts that are now monitoring what's going on in planning boards and regional councils all over the country, things that until now happened under the radar, things that have made the loss of um, Jewish land in the Galilee and in the Negev, simply facts of life, have made it extremely difficult for Jewish young Jewish families to buy homes, made it extremely difficult for Israeli farming. All of these things have happened under the radar because we have for many years allowed all of those regional and national planning councils to be controlled by anti-Zionist elements. So we are now addressing that head on, and we have collected a very small, very professional, very experienced group of experts. That's everything from hydrologists, geologists, city planners, electrical engineers, and former politicians, former governors and mayors, to participate in these planning boards and to keep tabs on what's actually happening, to file objections when necessary, and to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of how things that are cooking underneath the surface can and will affect the Zionist vision for the land of Israel moving forward. So I haven't left a lot of time for questions this evening because there's so much to cover. Before I sign off, I have about 5 minutes. I just wanted to give you a heads up about some of the data and analysis that you should be looking for in the coming weeks, some of our upcoming publications. So policy papers are now being completed and then will be translated on an updated set of recommendations regarding polygamy. It is something that the government of Israel, we forced the government of Israel to deal with and has fallen by the wayside in the shadow of the war. We intend to force this back onto the top of the government's agenda. Also, the issue of al-Khiran, the newest community that was approved after all the legal battles against it were finally overcome down in the Negev. So we'll be publishing a chronology and a chronicle, more or less, of the al-Khiran Chronic, which is really an example of how land use policy, the black hole of a non-policy, has worked to the detriment of the development of the state of Israel for far too long. We will finally be publishing the full report on the settler violence narrative, analyzing a full set of data. This is several hundred pages of data and analysis, expert criminologists, all sorts of materials that we received from the United Nations that had to be analyzed, from UNOCHA and various other official sources, breaking down exactly what the situation is in terms of settler violence. And it is definitely something that will have a massive impact on the narrative in and outside of Israel regarding Judea and Samaria. We also are looking forward to the publication, and this, I hope that all of you out there this evening will be as excited about it as I am. 10 years ago, the Regavim's Adam Va'adama Center, our policy think tank, published a collection of articles by renowned experts on international law regarding Israel's rights in Judea and Samaria, property law and international law in Judea and Samaria. The articles were never translated, and that is a terrible shame. So we finally translated them and updated some of them in light of the past 10 years of court decisions, Supreme Court decisions, international court decisions regarding Israel's rights in Judea and Samaria. What does international law have to say about Israel's position in Judea and Samaria? So a second edition in Hebrew and a first edition in English will be coming out soon. We are looking for donors who will help us to publish this and get it hopefully published through a reputable legal or university press in the United States and get it onto the curriculum in universities and law schools, wherever these issues are taught, to dispel some of the misinformation and to anchor the conversation about Israel and Judea and Samaria in fact and law. Anyone who has any thoughts about that, I encourage you to reach out to me. One more study that we're hoping to update is our periodic study of judicial bias, which essentially I urge you to look at the previous edition, which more or less it is still valid, but each time we update it, we bring more data to make the study more and more airtight to see it's essentially an index of judicial decisions by the Supreme Court of the State of Israel to see if we can identify objective parameters that indicate judicial bias. I encourage you to have a look at it. So those are all the things that are coming up. And some of the things that are really in the advanced stages of work. I appreciate your patience, and I hope that this was interesting. It's quite a different sort of webinar than those we've done in the past. But if you want more information about any of these or any of our other projects, any of our areas of activity, I urge you you can scan this one right here. It takes you straight to Regavim's website, or just go on, navigate to regavim.org. And all of our studies, all of our reports, all of our data are available there, maps, position papers, and full studies. And of course, if anyone wants to support our work, you can scan this and it will take you to our JGive page, which is once again up and running. For those of you who asked, it was frozen for a while, technical issues, and now is up and running and receiving online donations that go to support our work. I thank you again, and since we won't be seeing one another before then, in this format, I would like to wish you all a wonderful Pesach, a Passover holiday that brings all of us both joy and full redemption, and good news only. We are in very challenging times, and we need to stick together. We need to keep our wits about us. We also need to keep our eyes on the prize. At Regavim, we try to stay laser focused on why we're doing what we're doing. And I hope that this evening's webinar has clarified some of that, how we're doing what we're doing and why. Thank you all. Have a good night.